we must look to the past, to these great disasters, to learn how we can do better. In hindsight, the failings may seem obvious, but there are always new problems ahead of us. So let's keep one eye on the future of safety and one eye on a history of hazard. The year was 1911. The place, Manhattan, New York. A city full of life and teeming with people. The subway had only been open for 7 years. The 5 boroughs had consolidated into a single city a decade and a half earlier. The population was 3.4 million people, compared to over 20 million in the New York City metropolitan area today. This was also the era of the greatest European migration into the United States, and many of these new Americans began their new lives in the Big Apple. 1911 was also a time of still developing ideas about labor, health, and building and occupational safety. An Accident Reports Act had passed in 1910, and some unions had fought for a 10-hour workday and standard pay and working conditions. But there were many sweatshops in the city, particularly in the garment industry. Garment work had only recently moved out of the tenements and into shops and factories. The workers, primarily women, often worked in very poor, cramped conditions for long hours with bad pay.
We had been in the country only a year or less. For many, as for me, it was only the second job. For others, the first they had had. Most of us were not yet 20 years old. Mary Domsky Abrams.
One of these factories was the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory on the 8th, 9th, and 10th floors of a building on the corner of Green Street and Washington Place in Manhattan. On an average day, about 500 people worked on these 3 floors, the majority young immigrant women. The standard work week was 9 hours a day, Monday through Friday, and 7 hours on Saturday. Until 1909, 65 to 75-hour weeks had been common, but a successful garment workers' strike that year had resulted in the 52 hours typically worked by the shirtwaist makers in 1911. Similarly, regulations on worker safety were being advanced in fits and starts, but they were minimal, and many businesses ignored them. In 1913, there were 23,000 documented workplace and work-related deaths, 61 per 100,000 workers. That's almost 19 times the current rate. If the current workforce faced death at the 1912 rate, we would see over 85,000 workplace deaths per year, rather than the less than 5,000 we see today.
To assure safe and healthful working conditions for working men and women. Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970.
At the time, and for another 60 years, there was no federal regulatory body charged with creating and enforcing occupational safety rules. This was the historical context for the tragedy that took place in the spring of 1911. March 25th began like any other Saturday. The workers filed in, took their places at their workstations, ready for a day of tucking, sewing, or trimming the shirtwaists, which gave the company its name.
Everybody was doing individual things. One was tucking, one was making sleeves, one was making this. They weren't making the whole waist. They weren't sewing the whole waist. Pauline Pepe.
But the afternoon of that fateful Saturday was anything but ordinary. Sometime around 4:40, as the workers were preparing to leave for the day, a fire broke out on the 8th floor. It has never been definitively proven what caused the fire, but it began in a bin piled with fabric scraps. Later investigations would suggest a match or a cigarette butt as the catalyst for the flames, but other possibilities included the sewing machine engines or even intentional arson for the purposes of insurance fraud. What followed was one of the greatest workplace disasters in American history.
I looked across the shop. In front of me, I saw flames on the outside of the window shooting up. The flames were climbing up from the 8th floor. Celia Walker Friedman, 9th floor worker.
The building was equipped with 2 freight elevators, 2 stairways, and a fire escape. The stairways were on the opposite sides of the building, one leading to Green Street and the other to Washington Place. Once the fire was discovered, 9th floor workers began to evacuate in the direction of the freight elevators. Most workers did not use the Green Street stairs on a regular basis, and some were unaware they existed.
I knew about the staircase in the back because I used it for my work as a forelady. Sometimes I went to the 10th floor for trimmings, but the others never used the staircase. Anne Pedone.
Furthermore, the Green Street stairs were both visually and physically obstructed, difficult to see or reach for those attempting to evacuate in the direction of the elevators.
The door to the stairway was completely blocked by the big crates of blouses and goods. The fire crept closer to us and we were crowded at the elevator door, banging and hollering for the elevator. The first time it came up, the girls rushed in and it was crowded in half a second. Celia Walker Friedman.
But what about the other staircase, the one leading to Washington Place? At least on the 9th floor, it was locked.
All doors leading in or to any such factory shall be constructed as to open outwardly, where practicable, and shall not be locked, bolted, or fastened during working hours. New York State Labor Laws, Article 6, Section 80.
On the 9th floor of the 5 potential exits, 2 staircases, 2 sets of elevators, and a fire escape, none were fully usable for the duration of the fire. The Washington Place staircase door was locked. The small elevators on that side of the building faced competition from the 8th and 10th floors, also aflame, and likely never stopped at the 9th floor. Most workers were unaware a fire escape even existed.
I never knew about the fire escape. We used to use the freight elevator only. Anne Pedone.
The fire escape was flimsy and soon collapsed, giving time for only a few workers to reach safety below before collapsing, spilling about 20 workers 100 feet to the sidewalk.
I learned a new sound that day. A sound more horrible than description can picture. The thud of a speeding living body on a stone sidewalk. William Gunn Shepard, reporter.
On the Green Street side, those who knew of the staircase and fought through the obstructions to reach it had only 3 minutes to descend before it was engulfed in flames. This left the Green Street freight elevators, which were quickly packed full of bodies and collapsed after just a few trips, from the heat warping the cables and the extra weight of bodies flying down the elevator shaft and landing on top of the car. The workers on the 8th floor fared better than those on the 9th, but many still perished. After much struggle, an 8th floor machinist was able to unlock and open the door to the Washington Place staircase. The 8th floor workers were also able to take advantage of at least one trip on the passenger elevators. The fire itself prevented most workers from reaching the Green Street side of the 8th floor. The 10th floor was the luckiest. They received a phone call from the 8th floor early on in the ordeal, and most were able to escape to the building's roof before their floor was on fire. Those workers on all floors who could not attempt escape by any of the elevators or staircases either died in the factory or leapt from the windows and plummeted to the ground below. Overall, 146 people died in the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, most on the 9th floor, pinned in by the fire on one side and the locked door on the other. Ultimately, the fire led to worker safety investigations across the state and 38 new laws regulating labor and workplace safety. Some of these laws mandated better building access and egress, fireproofing requirements, the availability of fire extinguishers, the installation of alarm systems, and automatic sprinklers. Another result was the founding of the American Society of Safety Engineers, a key partner of OSHA today. This horrific accident in American history took place over a century ago, yet fire remains a danger in the modern workplace. The regulations in place today have created a far safer world, but we must do our part to make sure these rules are followed and safety tools and features maintained. Looking into our nation's past teaches us the consequences of ignoring safety. We must keep up our guard and keep an eye on a history of hazard.
Oh, New York ain't New York anymore. How I miss those old pals of mine. The sawdust is gone from the floor where we harmonize sweet Adeline. On the east side, west side, things ain't like before.